I was a college radio DJ. WXPL 91.3 FM, Fitchburg State Radio. Pray for waves. We had a broadcast radius of just under 10 miles. It was great. I was really into it. In the spring of what I believe was 1988, may have been the year before, I drove to New York City with another student to meet another group of us from the radio station to attend the Intercollegiate Broadcasting System Annual Conference. I'm much older now, and IBS just means irritable bowel syndrome, but when I was in college, it was the Intercollegiate Broadcasting System. My partner and I set out from Fitchburg State at 7 a.m. on a Friday morning, the conference beginning that afternoon at 3, figuring we had plenty of time. By Hartford, I had the sniffles and a scratchy throat. Just before Waterbury, we ran out of gas, which is how I found out my gas gauge didn't work. Then we ended up stuck behind an accident for almost 2 hours, just outside Danbury. We ended up hitting Manhattan at 5 p.m., a great time to get into Manhattan traffic. We'd missed the afternoon session of the conference. It was rush hour, we were hungry, and it took well over an hour to find a parking space anywhere near the hotel we were staying at that didn't cost way more money than either of us or both of us together had. And 7 of us stayed in a room booked for 2. In the fleabaggiest of fleabag hotels you can imagine. And I know what you're picturing, and it was worse. Room was just big enough for the 2 twin beds and a nightstand. No closet, no dresser. Your knees hit the door in the bathroom while using the toilet. We took turns sleeping on the floor at night. And if you had to go to the restroom, everybody rolled around one rotated position around the room, and then you slept right outside when you were done. 1981 Rolling Stone magazine called Times Square, quote, the sleaziest block in America. And in that spring, later in the 80s, 1987, 88, I can guarantee you it still was. By the time we went for slices of pizza for dinner, my sniffles and scratchy throat had become a full-blown severe sore throat and throbbing massive head cold. I skipped the afternoon session of the conference, the evening session of the conference, having missed the afternoon. And instead, I went to buy cough drops and cold medicine. I went back to our hotel room and tried to sleep, which I did off and on until my friends came back very late in the evening. And a couple hours after they had come back, somewhere 3, 4 in the morning, we all were awoken by huge screams and sirens blaring and people shouting at the top of their lungs. It sounded as if it was right outside our door. And our room was right up one flight of steps, kind of just off above the lobby. So anything going on down there, we heard as if it was right in the room. And of course, someone had been stabbed and was bleeding all over the lobby. And there were police officers all over the place. And people were screaming. And needless to say, few of us got back to sleep that night. In the morning, I had a fever. And the buddy I drove down with was also now starting to get sick. So I said I was just going home. And he decided to come with me. God bless him. He drove out of Manhattan through morning rush hour, which took us hours. Which is, we just cleared the Manhattan rush hour. We were on 684 when I was getting dizzy and I threw up in the car. Just outside Worcester, we got a flat tire. What a bad road trip. To this day, maybe the worst road trip I've ever been on. Sometimes, as much as you plan, as much as you're anticipating something, as much as you try, as much as you want something to work out well, the journey just doesn't turn out as planned. Life is just sometimes like that. The best laid plans, O mice and men, Scottish poet Robert Burns tells us, go often askew. The journey is not what we thought it'd be. And it ends in a place we didn't imagine. And yet, we not only go on, but we find ways most often to overcome and succeed anyway. Among the many songs Bruce Springsteen has written about fathers and sons and coming of age, the most poignant is probably Independence Day, a story song about a father and a son having a late-night conversation at a kitchen table where the son is telling the dad, I'm getting out of this dead-end house, I'm getting out of this dead-end town so I don't end up in a dead-end job and a dead-end life like you did. Springsteen often says he really hoped his father had forgiven him for that one by the time he passed away. To introduce the song on his 2016 tour, Springsteen offered some variation of this. Independence Day was the first song I wrote about fathers and sons. It's the kind of song you write when you're young, and you're first startled by your own parents' humanity. You're shocked to realize they had their own dreams and desires and hopes, and that it didn't pan out as perfectly as they might have wished. But all you can see is the adult compromises they've had to make, the daily lives they feel it seems they're locked into, and the world that it seems they can't escape. And when you're young, man, it's just all those limits, all those boundaries. And you can't see the blessings that might also come with it. And all you can feel is desire to run and to get away. I don't think any of us ever imagines we're going to be the one who lives a life of human compromises, of what Henry David Thoreau called the life of quiet desperation. But we all do, really, in some form or some way or another. And it's not until we're older and have had to make compromises that we come to see them not as how we have failed to have a life, but as our life. We find, as one of my other favorite rock theologians, Billy Joel, says, just surviving is a noble fight. And I think most of us think of ourselves as survivors, that we're pretty badass for making it as far as we have. And if we don't think of ourselves this way, maybe we should. No matter which road or journey you are on, things are certain to go wrong. If you spend too much time focused on the past, you miss the journey you're on in the present, the journey you're taking right now, the life you're making and living right now. There is not a silver lining in everything, but we do tend to learn more from what goes wrong than from what goes right. I learned a lot from that road trip to New York when I was in college. Don't drive into New York if you can take a bus or a train or fly. There is no such thing as low-cost or no-cost parking in Manhattan that you haven't arranged ahead of time. Learn how to change a flat tire before you get one, and always pay for the AAA membership. It's worth the money. When you travel, bring your favorite cough drops and cold medicine with you. And always, always research the hotel, the Airbnb in the neighborhood you plan to stay at. Never just take your traveling companion's word for it, that it will be fine. We do not look back on everything and laugh, of course. But time and distance do grant us a sense of perspective on our journey. That bad road trip was hell while I was on it. But no one was robbed, except for that guy in the lobby. None of us were hurt or killed. And it's become a wrong turn on the larger pilgrim journey of my life. A lesser chapter and otherwise okay story. We all know this, but we all forget it. Most of us live most of our lives as if we try to avoid this reality, that things will just go wrong sometimes. Something I've learned through my work as a spiritual director is how easy it is to miss life's sacred moments. The reason spiritual practices are so important is they force us to a self-discipline that requires us, at least during the time of the practice, to pay attention to right now. Being a spiritual director has also taught me that many people think spiritual experiences are grand, extravagant, and obvious. Most of my spiritual direction clients come into direction thinking they are not spiritual or do not get how to pray or meditate, or that they must suck at yoga because they never have a nirvana moment or see a burning bush or have visions of other realms or feel at one with the universe. And I explained to them, being spiritual is not about having access to a realm beyond that of mere mortals. Being spiritual is getting comfortable with your mortality and learning how to see your life as a pilgrimage, one giant, long, spiritual learning adventure. Today's the feast of St. Patrick. His journey definitely took him to unexpected places. He was a Romanized Briton, born in the late 4th century, probably in Scotland. When he was 16, he was captured by Irish raiding pirates, taken to Ireland and sold into slavery. And I'm going to bet he hadn't planned on that, being the son of a minor Roman official. About 6 years into captivity, he hears a voice. And when I hear that, I think that's that voice that wells up inside us and tells us, all right, we're going to do something now. And that voice urged him to escape, and he did. And he went back to Ireland, then went to continental Europe and became a priest. And then he decides to go back to Ireland to share his faith with everybody. Even slavery didn't condemn him to a resigned life of quiet desperation. Instead, he followed his heart, became a legend in the land in which he was first a slave. A couple years after graduating from Harvard Divinity School, I was teaching in a Catholic high school during the day and part-time at Fitchburg State College at night, and I applied to Brandeis University for their PhD program in English, literature, and spirituality. Just as I was about to send in my application, I received word that that particular program in English and religion had been canceled, eliminated. I was devastated. I was really set on doing that. But I had decided in my proposal that I would focus on my project on the novels of Chaim Potok. And through getting ready for that application, I met the guy via email who curated Rabbi Potok's website, and then I got into email correspondence with Rabbi Potok himself. So looking back, I got a lot out of that, which was really, really different and interesting and valuable. When I left the Catholic Church and my job teaching in a Catholic high school, I took the Massachusetts test for education licensure, the MTEL test. And when I got the results, I failed the subject matter test in English. And I was amazed because I breezed through the test, I knew everything, and I looked at my report on my score, and it was nearly 100% in all the categories except one in which I got a 0. I'm like, a 0? There's no way I got a 0 on that section of the test. There's just no way. But as much as I tried to tell somebody, like, there had to be a mistake on this, all I got was that, sorry, retake the test. So instead of retaking the test, I did a unit of clinical pastoral education and then did a ministerial internship at a Unitarian church. During my last year of teaching in that Catholic high school, I wrote a novel based on my experiences there, and I sent out just about 100 manuscripts and query letters to publishers and literary agents. And months after I'd sent the last one, I got a phone call from a really high-powered literary agent in New York City who said she didn't think she could sell the novel as it was, but if I could cut about 8,000 words and get rid of a couple characters, she could probably pitch it. Could I do that in the next 60 days? The day she called was 2 months to the day before my interview with the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. There was no way I was going to do that revision and get ready for the MFC and work full-time and make it all work. So I said, I just didn't think I could do it with what else is going on in my life. And she said, that's fine, I get it. If you write something else, send it to us. So I went to the MFC and I passed. And years later, which was a few years ago now, I did end up publishing that same novel. But the editor I worked with told me, yeah, but you're going to need to cut about 8,000 words. So I said, sure, but he said, just get it to us when you're done. So it took me most of a summer to fix it up, but I got it in. Now, none of these incidents really turned out exactly as I had hoped or as I had planned. If any one of them had turned out differently, my life would have been drastically different, and I probably wouldn't be here right now. None of these things were failures. They weren't even mistakes, really. Just the twists and turns of the journey of my life, my adventure, my pilgrimage. I know you all have your own. It is very easy to be thankful or grateful for comfort in life, for the big, pleasant gifts of ease that surround us. It's another thing entirely to look at our trials and hard traveling and recognize that we wouldn't be who we are, wouldn't be where we are. Life wouldn't be what it is if it didn't also include those. Sometimes our detours and roadblocks are the result of true tragedy, catastrophic health issues, malicious and evil actions and intent on part of other people. And when we see these instances as sources for redemptive suffering, that's one of religion's biggest sins. Rita Nakamisha Brock and Rebecca Parker in 2002 wrote a book called Proverbs of Ashes, in which they argued that violence of any form cannot be salvific, cannot save. And they said for centuries now in the West, the Christian story has been one of redemptive suffering because of the death of Jesus on a cross to pay for the sins of humanity. And they say a religious story based on this type of violent salvation cannot be a saving story. But they point us to a different view of the Christian and biblical message, which is not based on this kind of violence. One important part of the biblical vision of the world, they write, is that the world, this life, with everything that's in it, is still good and beautiful. Salvation, they write, is the experience of freedom and joy here and now on this earth. In the midst of violence, hunger, injustice, and betrayal, this world can be the place in which one stands in the presence of glory, beauty, and goodness, in the presence of God. The journey we are on is not necessarily the one we expected or the one we would choose. Yet there is something sacred, holy, and good about the entirety of our story. We deserve to see ourselves as a hero in a questing, epic pilgrimage. And as much as things sometimes go wrong, sometimes it's the exact opposite. Sometimes you start off figuring the journey will be a disaster, but you decide to give it a shot anyway, and it turns into something amazingly wonderful. The book and the film, Round Ireland with a Fridge, is the story of English comedian Tony Hawk's efforts to win a drunken bet he made in a pub by successfully hitchhiking around the perimeter of Ireland with a refrigerator. He gets the guy to agree it doesn't have to be a full-size refrigerator. It can be one of those mini ones you have in a dorm room or an office. But still, it's hitchhiking around Ireland, dragging this heavy little appliance. So he starts off one day in a pouring rain, soaked to the bone, and he doesn't get a ride for a long, long time. And he eventually gets picked up, and what he expects to be a laugh and a disaster, which he's probably going to lose, turns into an event in which he and the fridge are media stars. A radio station gets a hold of what they're doing, and they have daily fridge reports from him by phone. He meets royalty and people pretending to be royalty. He runs into a bishop and a bunch of nuns, and the bishop baptizes the fridge. He takes the fridge on boat ride. He kicks the fridge out of their tent one night to make room for the date that he brings back to it. He not only wins his bet, but he's welcomed into the end city of his journey. I think he ends in Dublin with a parade and this whole event put on by the radio station. And he gets a worldwide bestseller and a movie out of it. Now, sometimes it's the exact opposite. We think it's going to be a disaster, and it works out in ways we never imagined for the better. A pilgrimage is a journey made for moral or spiritual reasons to a special or sacred place for the purpose of changing, healing, teaching, or inspiring the pilgrim, the one making the journey. The pilgrim experiences make the journey in order to experience transformation. The pilgrimage reveals truths about the world and oneself. The pilgrim sees things previously missed or unclear and gains insight. The pilgrim's journey is not a vacation with neatly planned nightly hotel stays and tourist attractions and hotspot visits. It's a bad road trip. It's a comical walkabout. It's an epic quest. The pilgrim's journey is an adventure, and life itself, each of our lives, is a pilgrimage, the larger pilgrimage in which the smaller ones take place. The larger journey made up of the smaller journeys strung together. And perhaps this is actually the meaning of life. It's a journey made for its own intrinsic value as a spiritual learning experience undertaken for our transformation. In short, a pilgrimage. We are all pilgrims in this world on pilgrim journeys. Maybe, if we could be more present to this reality, that we are all on this road trip together, we could find ways to be kinder, more compassionate, less hateful, less angry, less vengeful, less violent. Maybe we could all, as Scrooge's nephew says in A Christmas Carol, think of other people as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys.